How's it going, everyone? NeedleMouse here, and man, I love Sonic Unleashed. I don't even know what to say at this point. Honestly, the game is just fabulous and always fights for the top spot as my favorite Sonic game with Sonic Frontiers. And more often than not, it comes out on the top as the better video game. From the absolutely amazing music to the super fun day stages to, yes, even the werehog, there's almost nothing I don't like about this game. One of my absolute favorite things about the game, though, are the environments. Being based on real-life locations across this beautiful planet of ours, I just love it. From the wonderful blues and whites of Apatos being just like the real-life islands of Mykonos and Santorini in Greece, to the wondrous Atabat, just like the real-life nations of Indonesia and Thailand. The amount of cool locations they chose is great. And if there's one thing I also love, it's history. For those who are in my server or just around me know that I love history with all of my heart. And it's one of the most interesting things to me in the world. Exploring the past to understand how our world works and what made it the way it is now is just so cool to me. So I decided to combine my two favorite interests that I have, Sonic the Hedgehog and world history. So in this video, I want to talk about every environment in Sonic Unleashed, their real-life counterparts, and how they relate to each other. Today, let me tell you all about the history behind Sonic Unleashed's environments. Minor note before we begin, and it's quite an important one. I do not know everything, and I don't think I ever will. Just because I sound like a nerd talking about history doesn't mean all of this may be completely accurate. History is a very tricky thing to the point where some accounts could be true and some accounts aren't. Of course, I'll link all my sources at the end of the video, but if I do make mistakes, please, you're more than welcome to tell me in the comments, and, well, I am sorry for any inconsistencies I make. But first, let's get a little background. Development of Sonic Unleashed would initially begin in 2006 once the Hedgehog engine would be created. The game initially started out as a sequel to the Sonic Adventure games, which is why the game was called Sonic World Adventure at first. And though the title would be different here in the United States, Japan wouldn't actually change it at all, and the game still remains as Sonic World Adventure there. But after Sonic Team started to add more and more unique things to the game, they realized that this wasn't going to be the third Sonic Adventure game, and shifted their focus on creating a more unique experience. While some things, such as the hub worlds, would remain, Unleashed would become a brand new experience that would shape the future of most mainline Sonic games, with it introducing the boost into 3D after the Sonic Rush duology pioneered it a couple years prior. But another thing that they did is they kept in the sort of realistic environments that Sonic Adventures had going for them. Sonic Adventure had Station Square, which is pretty much based on Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, while Sonic Adventure 2 was pretty much based entirely in San Francisco for the first half. Sonic Unleashed also went this route, but dare I say, it did its environment so much better than the adventure games. Sonic Adventure had some trouble when it came to its environment. Nothing about Station Square feels like the United States or Pennsylvania to me. I've actually been to the state multiple times since my sister goes to college there. Shout out to my sister, I love you so much. But it honestly doesn't look anything like it. With Mystic Ruins, I don't even know what this is. It's Mexico or maybe South America? There's no concrete location that it's based on. And the last adventure field is just the egg carriers, so that's just clearly not based on anything at all, so yeah. Adventure 2 struggles with the fact that its location is solely based in San Francisco and then out of nowhere Egypt. Like, honestly, where the hell does this pyramid come from? Is it Egypt? Maybe it's Sudan, because that country also has a lot of pyramids too. It's just strange and at times doesn't make any sense in the slightest. It doesn't feel like a coherent world after you stop being in the city. With Sonic Unleashed, it strikes a perfect balance where you can clearly tell what country or nation you're currently in, but at the same time, it's not too realistic and feels perfect for a video game. And it's honestly just amazing. And also, the pyramids don't just pop out of nowhere. Bonus points for that. To really explain how Sonic Unleashed does this feat, let's explore 2 of the 8 levels in today's episode, Apatos and Missouri, and explain why they are just amazing representations of their real-life counterparts. So without further ado, let's get straight into Windmill Isle. Good old Windmill Isle, one of my favorite stages in this game. It does a great job representing its own environment. Now, the island is based on 2 locations technically. The islands of Mykonos and Santorini, both located in Greece. Starting off with Mykonos, the island has been in the hands of multiple empires across the ages. The Romans, the Byzantines, the Ottomans, and then would finally fall under Greek sovereignty after the Greek War of Independence. The iconic blues and whites of the buildings you see now was actually created out of pure necessity in a time of crisis. You see, during the 1930s, Greece was suffering from a massive epidemic, and the nation's leader at the time ordered all Greek citizens to whitewash their houses. As the whitewash used to paint the outside of the citizens' homes contained and limestone, which happens to be a very potent disinfectant, and the blue would be added later to represent the Greek flag. The same can be said for Santorini too. In fact, the island's histories are quite similar, except Santorini is significantly older than Mykonos. Now, how does this relate to Sonic the Hedgehog? Well, Apatos is almost exactly like these two islands, apart from the obvious fact of the blues and whites of the buildings, as well as it literally looking at like an island. Some of the food items sold here are traditionally Greek, and would be sold there too. Interestingly enough, if you clear all Don Faccio missions in Apatos, you get an achievement called Gyro with Relish, which directly references a very delicious food that originated in Greece called, well, gyro. Another thing that I will also be mentioning is the flags of each fictional nation and comparing them to their real-life equivalents. Taking a closer look at the flag of Apatos, we see a very striking resemblance to the modern-day flag of Greece, but with a very cool anchor being added as well, which I think makes it really freaking cool. In fact, I honestly think this flag would fit Greece better, as the country is a massive archipelago full of islands, and the anchor would perfectly fit in with the sea environment of the country, but hey, that's just my opinion. Even taking in the simple fact that names of the people living in Apatos are very similar to that of Greek names, it's just so cool. And again, we shall see this really cool thing being repeated in all future environments. Overall, Apatos is a wonderful recreation of Greece that really does capture the islands of Santorini and Mykonos quite well. Missouri is a very interesting case. What we have here is most clearly an African nation. I mean, take a look at the animals and plant life. We have elephants, giraffes, zebras, and of course massive baobab trees, which are all native to the African continent. But Africa has well over 50 nations within it as of recording this video. So, which of this nation did Sonic Team base Missouri on? If you guessed the Republic of Mali, then you, my friend, did a good job. Now, the biggest similarity between Missouri and Mali is when we take a closer look at the architecture, specifically when we compare it to a specific city in Mali. This is Timbuktu, an ancient city that's been around since the 12th century when the Empire of Songhai initially built it. And while just like most places in the world, it would fall into hands of rival nations, such as in this case Morocco and then later the French Empire, the city would remain almost untouched since it was built, leaving an amazing piece of history that anyone could visit. Now, apart from its interesting history, Timbuktu's architecture was a direct inspiration for our good old Sonic Unleashed and the nation of Missouri. When taking a closer look at both cities, one can clearly see that both are made out of primitive mud bricks, which makes a lot of sense since the city was built so long ago. You can also see the same wooden stakes poking out of the city walls in Timbuktu as in Missouri, which in the real city is actually scaffolding and also support that helped the ancient architectures build Timbuktu in a way that wouldn't collapse, and also to provide them a way to keep climbing up and keep adding mud bricks to high areas. But that's as far as buildings go. Let's talk about the food. Missouri has a lot of unique foods that are obviously found in Africa. Take the mellow yam, for example. Now, of course, there's no such thing as a mellow yam in the real world, but we do have yams, a type of tuber that is quite delicious, and is a close relative to sweet potatoes. That's right, baby. This video, you aren't just learning history to make yourself seem smarter in front of your parents. You're also learning about tubers. Let's go! But back to the subject at hand, yams are a staple of many cuisines in Africa. We also have something called an ibanga, which is called fleet-footed. It could be referring something to like an ostrich, but I honestly have no idea what this one could be. And the last food I'll mention is the cacao. Now, obviously, this is just a cacao tree's pod, which can be found in, lo and behold, Mali or countries that border it. One last thing I will touch upon is, of course, the flag of Missouri, and honestly, I have no idea what it could be referencing here. We have a standard tricolor, but also a baobab tree on it. The closest thing I can find in Africa is the flag of Kenya and the flag of Lesotho. With Kenya, while not being really a tricolor, we have a central object that represents the country. Lesotho, on the other hand, is an actual tricolor with a central object, this time being a traditional hat from Lesotho represented within it. The only other flag I could mention is the flag of Rwanda, since the colors are similar, but the tricolor of the flag is positioned in a very different way, as well as the sun being positioned in a completely different way to that of the baobab tree seen in the Missouri flag. But these are the closest flags I could find in Africa, although we do have the flag of Lebanon, which is not in Africa, and it doesn't have two colors, but hey, we have a tree here, so that's pretty close, right? Well, anyway, gotta give it to Sonic Team a pat in the back here. This was yet another wonderful environment. Alaska is one of my personal favorite environments in this game. I've always been a sucker for icy environments, probably because I've lived one for almost 8 years of my life. A beautiful environment, but one that is tricky to talk about. When it comes to pretty much every place in Sonic Unleashed, they're based on, at most, 3 actual nations. Alaska, though, deviated from that quite a lot. What we have here is a nation settled in the north part of the world, which means it can only be based in the Arctic Circle. Alaska, the Kingdom of Norway, and the Russian Federation are the countries I'll focus on the most here. And yes, Canada, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, and Denmark are also part of the Arctic Circle, Denmark being through the fact that it owns Greenland, of course, but honestly, 3 nations is more than enough to talk about, okay? Like I said, it's not really 3 nations, but more about 3 histories of multi-ethnic peoples that have lived here. Let me explain. In the aforementioned countries, there have always been natives living there for eons, and I will talk about 3, one from each nation. These are the Chukchi, Inuits, and Sami. Starting off with the Chukchi, an ancient people originating over 1,000 years ago. They occupy the very far northeast of Russia, living in the Chukota Autonomous Okrug. They have had a rough history. At first ignored by the Russians, they would be then subjugated to attempts of extermination. Thanks to their environment, though, they were able to survive and make peace with the Russians in the 18th century, and since then it has lived peacefully and traded with all Russian governments, from the Russian Empire to the Soviet Union and the current-day Federation. The Inuits are a group of people living in Greenland, Canada, and Alaska, and they are by far the most populous and oldest of any Arctic peoples. They were one of the only native people to the Americas to escape the massive bloodshed that the Europeans brought with them, most likely due to their northern locations. And even when engaging with the Europeans, they would almost immediately start trading with them since they were more acclimated to the north better. And now there are even massive reservations in the north of Canada for these people, similar to what we have in the United States with the Native Americans living here. And finally, we have the Sami people. Living mostly in Scandinavia, these people at first had little contact with Sweden, Norway, and Finland. It was only in the 19th century when these countries started to aggressively expand north that would lead to repression of culture and language. It wouldn't be only until the 1900s when it was Norway that started to pour billions to assimilate and preserve the culture of these people. Finland and Sweden would soon both follow suit, and it was a success. These people have such similar, but yet such different cultures and languages that it would take 3 years to explain everything that we have here. But y'all are Sonic fans, so let me get back to the funny blue rat. Now, we obviously have the igloos, which can be traced back to all 3 peoples, but it was the Inuits who came up with them first. And also, of course, we have the food, the most famous from this part of the world being, of course, the canned horror. It's famous for the fact that when you give it to Chip, he'll say a string of symbols signifying his cursing. But the canned horror indeed has a real-life inspiration in the delicacy known as, oh god, Sturströmming. My Swedish friends, tell me if I said that right. It does come from Sweden, yes, and it does look as bad as it is in Unleashed, and I think I know why Chip was cursing out when he said it, but hey, if you think it tastes good, let me know, maybe I'll give it a try. There's only 2 more things I would want to mention before going on to the next nation. The naming of Alaska comes from 2 things, actually. The ska at the end comes from Alaska, but the first part is actually a reference to the Russian word holodna, which means cold. Putting the 2 together, you have Alaska. And yeah, that was absolutely just an excuse to the fact that I know Russian, although I'm not Russian. Long story. Anyway, let's end it off by talking about the flag, which the coloration references Finland with the blue and white, but even then, the blue in Finland is a lot of a deeper blue. But apart from that, I honestly have no idea what this could be. It gives me Greenland vibes, although it's really not, and the only other flag I found was a proposed flag of Antarctica in 1999. I mean, kinda? It's a massive stretch, but I don't know where this flag could be from. If you do, though, please leave it in the comments. I'm genuinely so curious where this flag could have originated from. In the end, I think that Alaska is one of the best environments in this game, able to capture the traditions and the culture of the Arctic people quite well. Alright, time for one that will probably take the longest to explain. Post-editing NeedleMouse, yeah, so by far, after editing the script, I realized that it was Alaska that took the longest to explain, which honestly makes sense, but this part is also quite long, so lock in. Spagonia. This country is based on not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 nations.
God damn it, I tried.
These 4 nations are the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, the French Republic, the Italian Republic, and the Kingdom of Spain. And all of these nations have such a long and deep histories. I don't even know where to start. Alright, I guess we should start with the architecture. This one takes a lot of inspiration from Spanish and Italian architecture. Taking a look at a city like Florence in Italy, or Albasarin in Spain, and you can clearly see the similarities between them and Spagonia. Florence and Albasarin both have ancient histories, but Florence, of course, was built a very long time, during the Roman times in 59 BCE, making it one of the most ancient yet well-preserved cities in Italy. Albasarin was built much later, in 1104, but it still has quite similar architecture to Florence. Interestingly, both nations had a massive explosion in economy, population, as well as fame during the Renaissance era in the 15th and 16th centuries. Now, the United Kingdom influence comes in when looking at the centerpiece in both the night and day stages, with that, of course, being the clock tower, being an in-world equivalent to the Big Ben. The Big Ben, or its full name, the Great Clock of Westminster, was built in 1859 and is the leading symbol of the United Kingdom. The French influence comes in strong with the use of accordions in the hub world, which is a massive staple in French music. French architecture is also quite similar to that of Florence and the other Renaissance cities, as well as the clock tower itself being built in a sort of Gothic French-like way that we all know. Now, the histories behind the French, Italian, Spanish, and British is so long, it would take about 10 hours for me to explain everything. So obviously, I'm barely gonna talk about it here. The most important thing you should know is that all were expansionist empires that at one time or another had massive influence all over the world. In particular, the British, who at their peak in 1990 controlled over 25% of land area in the world, which is insane. All these countries have very deep and ancient histories. The Italians, of course, having the most ancient ones with the Roman Empire, starting in 509 BCE and ending with the Byzantine Empire in the 1400s. And when the Roman Empire did fall, it allowed for the creation of the most primitive versions of French, English, and Spanish nations who would shape the modern world as we know it. Another thing I should probably mention is the food in Spagonia. I mean, there's literally a baguette. Do I need to elaborate? There's, of course, such items like cheese and tomatoes, which are essential to Italians' cuisines. And finally, the nail in the coffin is the fact that we have a pasta dish. Italia! But anyway, let's end off this section, which I shortened significantly, with the flag of the nation, which is really interesting. It's a combination of the flag of the Vatican City and the flag of San Marino. The coloration is the same as San Marino's flag, but the position of the colors is the same as the Vatican, as well as the crest being located in the same spot as you can see in the Vatican's flag. But that's pretty much everything about Spagonia. If you ignore the insanely complicated histories of these nations, then yeah, that's it. But seriously, Sonic Team, you did a pretty good job combining the Western European countries into one nation. Oh my god, I'm okay. But seriously, Sonic Team did a pretty good job combining the Western European countries into one nation. Yunnan is a country that is so freaking interesting, and it is pretty much solely because of the country it's based on. Yunnan is of course based on the People's Republic of China, seen in so many different ways. Starting off with the absolutely beautiful architecture. Chinese architecture is one of the oldest and, dare I say, the most beautiful in world history. Traces of the architecture can be traced back all the way to the 1600 BCE. And that's just insane. And it hasn't changed that much in 3,500 years. Yunnan replicates these ancient Chinese buildings quite well, having the same pleasing roofs and windows to the real-life equivalent. The real city that I found most similar to Yunnan is Dali, China, a city that is placed on water. Even the British in Dali look very similar to that of Yunnan's. Another city I completely forgot to mention I was first recording this is Liaozhong, China, which also looks quite similar to that of Yunnan, and even has more similar bridges than Dali, China. In fact, I think it was these two core places that inspired Sonic Team to create Yunnan. But it's also based on the Huangshan mountain range located in eastern China, since Yunnan is quite mountainous and it's the only major mountain range in China. And as far as major locations go, it's of course based on the Great Wall of China too, as in the actual stage, Dragon Road, you can clearly see Sonic running of what looks like to be the Great Wall. As far as the history goes, Chinese history might be the most confusing and deep and complicated in world history, and it would also take hours to explain, so let's simplify it a little. China has always had massive and long-running dynasties that would last for hundreds of years, and each time a new dynasty came to power, culture and many things would change. In particular is when the Qing dynasty came to be that China's culture radicalized quite a lot as the country militarized quite quickly and would grow to its largest territorial size ever. But let's talk about the culture specifically. It is one of the most ancient and deepest too, and you can see it all around Yunnan with the way the people talk, and as well as the decorations being all inspired by Chinese culture. Then of course we have food. Lin's meat buns are a direct reference to bao buns created in Fujian, China. And you know, minor tangent, I love bao buns so much. They're so freaking delicious, man. There was this one Korean place I went to the other day that had like red bean paste bao buns for the dessert, and oh my god, they were so freaking good. Oh my god. Speaking of sweet things, we also have peach buns, which are a sweet dessert made in China called Tang Yuan. Definitely butchering all these names, god. And finally we have Wang's noodles, which is literally just a ramen or a noodle dish that is found in China 100%, which would honestly probably taste amazing. I'm starving right now, and this is making me feel really sad. But finally, let's talk about the flag. It is literally the flag of China, except the 5 stars are replaced with the chunning bird. Yeah, I have absolutely nothing else to say. The flag is literally just that. But that's about it for Chunan, a great recreation of what China could look like in the Sonic world. People, it is time for Freedom Land! Empire City! Empire City, the stage that was thrown in at the last second because Sonic Team realized that Sonic Unleashed needed some freedom and liberty to be brought in. I've honestly run out of America jokes here to make this section ever so slightly longer because Empire City will be the easiest country to talk about since the country is clearly a parallel to the United States of America, but more specifically, New York City. Now, for my non-American audience who might not know where that is, here's a map. And yes, the state is called New York, but there's also a capital called New York. It's stupid, I agree. Good history lesson about New York. It was once called New Amsterdam because the Dutch used to own this land until the Brits said no and slapped them out of America. They'd never have any claims in America after that. Apart from, like, I think a couple of islands. I have to fact check that. New York was an integral city during the American Revolutionary War, and to this day remains as one of the most famous places in the world. Everyone knows the massive skyscrapers and the Statue of Liberty, after all. I personally have been to New York many times, specifically Manhattan, and I have to say I don't like the city at all, honestly. But Unleashed version of New York did capture the best parts of the city, starting off with, of course, the massive skyscrapers. It's really cool that they are engaging in gameplay, having run up them, or while railgunning, quickly switch rails to avoid crashing into them. The name of Empire City actually comes from the fact that the state of New York is often called the Empire State, which can be applied to New York City being called the Empire City. Where did that come from? Well, during, once again, the American Revolutionary War, New York was the main base of operation for the British Army, which would lead the young General George Washington to remark that the state was the seat of the empire, which led to the creation of the name. But apart from that, the food sold here is literally what everyone thinks about American food. We have steaks, fried chicken, burgers, and also tacos for some reason. That's Mexican food. Then I guess America doesn't steal just oil from countries. They steal everything. But finally, let's end it off with the flag, which is obviously based on one country only. Empire City's flag is based on, of course, the flag of the United States, but interestingly, the meaning of the stars and the stripes is completely different to their meaning in the real world. The stars in the flag of the United States represents the 50 states, while the 13 stripes represent the original 13 colonies. In Empire City, the stars represent the many cultures in the country, and the stripes represent the cultures coming together on one big melting pot, which makes a lot of sense, since the United States is often called a giant melting pot of cultures. In the end, Empire City, even though being thrown in at the last second, does a pretty good job at capturing everyone's favorite Walmart shopping, gun-loving, beer-drinking country. If that was a joke, please don't cancel. Shamar, what an interesting country. Now, for the longest time ever, this was my favorite level in Unleashed until the next environment, but we'll get to that in a sec. Now, the country is based on present-day country of Jordan, which is the closest country to my home country, and I'm only mentioning it now because literally no one knows about my country. Anyway, starting off with the architecture. It's honestly very cool, being that of an ancient city partly built into the mountain, very similar to the ancient city of Petra. Now, Petra was founded by an ancient people called the Nabateans, who were perhaps the first humans to ever settle in the Middle East. But from 1516 to 1918 CE, it was all controlled by the Ottomans. Interestingly, the Ottomans wouldn't actually touch the ruins at all and leave them for historical value. But anyway, Sonic Unleashed Shamar also has the same type of ruins built into the mountains. In fact, even the way they build is very similar to that of Petra. But that's not the only thing Jordan and Shamar have in common. The country has a lot of food that is very Middle Eastern, starting off with chai. Now, I don't care that this is off topic because I have suffered for too long, and at this point, if you've made it this far in the video, you're cool and you're okay with this tiny crash out. As someone who loves tea, it pisses me off so much when people say chai tea. What the hell do you mean chai tea? Chai means tea. You're saying tea, that's stupid. Just say chai. It's just chai. Are you okay? Just say chai! Anyway, alright, back to the topic at hand. Chai is drunk in many Middle Eastern countries and is loved, which makes a lot of sense as it's literally the greatest drink in the world, only topped by water. Not biased here, it's peak. Get that artificial Lipton shit out of here. Well, anyway, there's also curry. And while most people associate it with India, which is very fair, there's also very many types in the Middle East too, and they are all quite delicious. The final food I'll mention is elastic ice cream. Now, this is a direct reference to Turkish dondurma, or ice cream. Y'all know the Turkish dudes who always prank you, make you feel stupid because you can't grab the ice cream. Well, this is the actual ice cream that they sell. It's actually a little elastic too in the real world. And if I do get the footage, which we'll see if I cut this out, but if I do get the footage, you'll actually see me buying some dondurma, considering my home country has many of these guys all around the city. It's really cool actually, and case in point, I've had it many times. The last thing I'll go over is the flag of Shamar, which is literally just the flag of Jordan. The major difference is that the star is replaced by a brand new symbol, and the colors are slightly different. But that's everything I have to say about Shamar, and as someone who has been to the Middle East before many times, I can safely say that they capture the spirit of Jordan and other Middle Eastern countries very well. But we have only one more nation to go over, coincidentally also being the best one in the game, gameplay-wise. Adabad is one of my personal favorite locations in Sonic history. I love the levels so much, even though it runs like 2 FPS on my PS3. And man, the environment is also based on one of my favorite regions in Southeast Asia, specifically the Kingdom of Thailand, the Republic of Indonesia, and the Kingdom of Cambodia. Alright, these countries have quite an intertwined history. Cambodia was once even part of Thailand, and they were all at the minimum occupied, but to some extent, by European colonials and during the Second World War by the Japanese. In fact, all these countries have gone through so much bloodshed that I'm not going to mention here since this is, after all, a Sonic video. If you're interested in history, though, I recommend watching the channels Knowledgepedia and the Armchair Historian, as well as checking out the GOAT of history on YouTube, Oversimplified. But back to the funny Blu-ray. The architecture seen in the actual levels is extremely reminiscent to the ancient structures found in Cambodia, specifically the ancient city of Angkor. The old buildings seen in the real world are quite literally the same as the ones in Adabad, and they are beautiful. The hub world is actually very reminiscent of the Koh Phangan village in Thailand, while the whole place being surrounded by many islands is very similar to that of Indonesia. Even the music of the hub world is based on the instruments originating in both Bali and Java, which are Indonesian islands. The food is basically one-for-one for traditional Southeast Asian foods. Bananas, for example, originate from this area of the world and can be found in Adabad. A live honker can also be bought, which isn't a real fish, obviously, but represents the massive sea-based culture in these countries. And the last food I'll mention is a mollusk, which is also representative of the sea-based cuisine. And honestly, clams and mollusks are very baller and taste wonderful in my opinion. I'm very big into seafood. I really want to go to Thailand. I've heard like the food is amazing there. The final thing to talk about is, of course, the flag, and it is literally just the Thai flag, plus stars and dolphin. Yeah, no need to elaborate here. We have a very simple flag. But with that, I will say Adabad represents the nations of Thailand, Indonesia, and Cambodia very well. And this is just such an amazing environment. But yeah, that was the history behind all 8 Sonic Unleashed countries, their origins, the origins of their flag, food, cultures, and most importantly, their history. If you simplify it so much that all of y'all can understand. Now, I'm not saying anything bad. There's probably definitely historians out there, but let's be honest, most of my audience are Sonic fans, and most of you probably don't want to hear about the history of these countries that much, which is why I've simplified it so much to give you some true understanding behind these countries. Now, if you want longer historical videos, then let me know in the comments. I would be more than down to do a much deeper dive into each of these countries and do a simple episode by episode to talk about every single country. But if you are interested in history now, there are countless channels on YouTube that make fabulous videos on all of these countries, and I'll have all of their channels linked down in the description. And a massive shout out to Stickman Guides, who actually helped me come up with this idea, so go check out his channel. He makes very fun and very useful, to be honest, Sonic content. Well, anyway, thank you all so much for watching through this massive video. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you want to see more videos based on other Sonic games and their histories down below, as well as if you're interested into a deeper dive into all the histories. I hope you're having a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and I'll see you all next time. Ciao!